Hello and welcome back to Conversations from the Classroom. And this is episode 3. For this episode, I went back through the archives and I had invited Alan Hynes and Miriam McCabe, who featured in episode 2, previously in to speak to our third years. Now, with lockdown and everything that had happened, we ended up having to do a Zoom meeting, right? So the workshop was about ethos and interviews in Catholic schools and how your cert and particularly your specialism in Catholic religious education would assist you and enhance your performance in an interview context, particularly around the question of ethos. So I hope you enjoy this session and this episode, and it really is a resource that will really stand to you going into the future, as it's important to remember that Alan Hynes and Miriam are constantly involved in the interview process in schools. So they're really giving you the insight from the other side of the table. I hope you enjoy it.
So hello, I suppose the best thing I could do first of all is introduce myself and tell you where I'm coming from. So I am a teaching principal. I've been teaching since 1992. That's a long time. And 14 of those years would have been spent as a principal in a primary school as a teaching principal. And for the last 4 years, I've been working on secondment with CPSMA, that's the Catholic Primary Schools Management Association. Our primary role would be to assist principals and chairpersons of boards of management. So as you can appreciate, a lot of that work would be around recruitment of teachers, and all the other management issues that come up. Okay.
Perfect. Alan Hynes here from St. Senan's Education Office in Limerick. So we're one of 21 education offices around the country. Typically, each diocese has its own education office that's headed by a diocesan education officer, a DEO, sometimes called diocesan secretaries. And we exercise the roles and responsibilities of the patrons. So the bishop of each diocese is patron. We exercise their roles and responsibilities under the Education Act with regard to the schools that lie within that diocese. St. Senan's is a little unique in that around 15 years ago, 3 dioceses, Killaloe, Limerick and Kerry, came together to form one shared services office based in the Diocese of Limerick. Later on, the Diocese of Cashel-Lemley came in as well. So now St. Senan's, we serve 4 dioceses, 517 schools in total, making us the largest education office in the country in terms of just the number of schools. I previously worked in CPSMA with Miriam and have been involved in Catholic education now for about 4 years. So very pleased to join you this morning.
Okay, so I suppose the best thing we could do probably is you can see the slides. We're going to work through them, and both Alan and I are going to speak to, I suppose, working in a Catholic school, but primarily with the focus on your applications to work in a Catholic primary school, with a focus on ethos and the importance of ethos. So we'll get started on that then, Alan. Okay.
Yep, perfect.
So I'm going to let Alan speak to ethos, but and talk you through what we're working on today.
So perfect. Ethos is one of those words, I suppose, well, you're probably more familiar with it maybe than shall we say, non-teaching or people who aren't currently in teaching college. Ethos is defined in the Education Act as the characteristic spirit of the school. So section 15.2 of the Education Act makes reference to it. And the board of management of a school and the staff within a school are obligated by the Act to uphold the characteristic spirit or ethos of any particular school. So in Catholic schools, the ethos of the school is the Catholic ethos. Now, ethos has a lot of different strands, and we're going to unpick through some of those throughout this presentation. But ethos, I suppose, in one level, people can simply associate it maybe with simple religious instruction in terms of the education around the gospel stories, the Bible stories, the beliefs of the Catholic faith. Sacramental preparation would obviously be there as well. A little deeper than that, it would be how prayer marks the day within a school, the religious iconography that you find around the school in terms of pictures and statues. The names of most schools have a religious flavour in that they're named after a saint or some other aspect of the faith. Recently, actually, here near me in Tune, 3 schools came together in an amalgamation and have now called themselves Trinity National School. So both a nod to the ethos and also, I suppose, to the origins of now that now amalgamated school, 3 into 1. Other aspects of ethos, though, are a little deeper and actually address how the school goes about its business. So I'm kind of jumping ahead there to the third question. In one sense, how does it influence the day-to-day work of the school is in those things. The prayer that marks the day, the opening prayer of the day, maybe the grace before and after meals, prayer at the end of the day, the images around the school, other aspects, the sacramental preparation and the place of religious instruction within the school day. Deeper than that, though, ethos has to address how the staff of school, the teaching staff, non-teaching staff, and how the management of the school actually go about their business. Not only in how they teach the pupils, but how they treat with them and how they treat with each other, how they deal with each other in terms of staff, but also then in terms of the wider school community, parents and that community maybe that exists around the school. Miriam now would have been a principal in a Catholic school, so she might just maybe add a little to what I've just said there.
Yeah, obviously having sat on many selection panels for Catholic schools, something that we are very conscious of is that we are maintaining, boards of management have that obligation to maintain the ethos of the school, and obviously recruitment is a huge piece there, because when you recruit someone to a school, you're bringing somebody else into a school, and it changes a school, and the whole idea of ethos is that it's a living piece, it's growing, it's changing. It's developing, and a core piece of that is when we bring new personnel into the school. So I suppose if we move on, Alan, we'll be fleshing that out as we go through and the importance. But I suppose, why is, in particular the Catholic ethos, why are we focusing on that at this time? So what we have here is, 89% of schools are under the patronage of Catholic Church. That's a fact. So the vast majority of people, when they're applying for jobs in schools around the country, will actually be applying to schools of a Catholic ethos. And at this time, whether you're aware or not, schools are currently developing their admission policy as a result of the Admissions Act. You may have heard about this in the news or in media, where there would have been discussion around the whole piece of not being allowed to give preference to people of the Catholic faith. But what actually has occurred is schools are developing their policies, and a huge part of that, an emphasis and focus, if you like, has come onto the ethos of the school and the entitlement of a school to have its ethos, where schools might have before this kind of been afraid to celebrate their ethos. It's now actually coming to the fore that schools are entitled to celebrate their ethos. They're entitled to have it. And that separation between ethos and Catholic ethos and then religious instruction is going to be clearly defined going forward, whereby the ethos the school is entitled to and it doesn't need to be ashamed of. Alan mentioned the different, the crucifix, the day-to-day piece of how we treat each other. That's all part of the ethos of the school. As well as that, at the moment, we have the NCCA are redeveloping the primary curriculum. And currently we have, so 1999 was the last curriculum development that this country saw. So it's been quite a while since there has been any, real focus on the development of the curriculum. So NCCA have been tasked with actually looking at that at the moment and redeveloping the curriculum. Now, in doing so, I suppose the whole issue of the ethos or religious instruction in the school has actually come to bear. And it's a question that's being asked, and it's something that you should be aware of, because it will influence, if you like, how the curriculum is approached. So the place of the patrons program within that. Now, the patrons program is actually a term that NCCA themselves have developed, and it refers to that religious instruction piece, that what was traditionally that half hour in the day where the children were taught religious education. So that piece, you know, while it's one part, what we're looking at today is greater than that. It's more than just the religious education piece. It's about the whole ethos of the school. It's a living and very vital and important part of what makes us a Catholic school. I think David has something he'd like to say there.
I guess just coming on that point, I think that's a really, I think what you could nearly phrase that, Miriam, I think is what you're actually talking about today is the broader religious education that happens in the school. And I've already flagged it with you in previous lectures about the distinction between religious instruction and religious education. It's important that their learning into a faith not be considered the sole criteria of religious education, or to put it a better way, that religious education can't be purely reduced to religious instruction. And that actually would run contrary to the Catholic approach to religious education, particularly between the relationship between faith and reason. And we covered that earlier on in our lecture series about that dynamic relationship that exists between faith and reason, and how actually if we were to move purely through a learning into purely I suppose to quote unquote indoctrinational approach, would actually run contrary to a Catholic approach to religious education and a Catholic understanding of what it means to be human, and the rationality and autonomy of the individual to freely choose to come to faith, and for it to be a free gift that they receive, and actively recognize it in their own integrity to take it on in their lives. So I think Miriam is hitting on a really strong point, is that when we talk about ethos, you can think about it as in the broader religious education that happens in the school, because it's important to remember that within a Catholic school, the whole educational enterprise and how we do what we do is informed by that ethos and that gospel foundation. So everything that we do is animating and moving from that space. So it's just said I come in on that point just to clarify, because there's so much, and I think you'll all agree, guys, there's so much lingo that goes on around RE. So we have, you know, for instruction, religious education, patrons programs. It's almost like bamboozled by terminology. And I suppose you're hitting on a really interesting point, Miriam, when we look at ethos as being the broader part of the school. You know?
You see, from a management perspective, we get many questions with regard to a parent who comes to a school and says, I don't want my child doing religion, right? So to put it in very simplistic terms. So what happens there is, you see, schools, and because of the media coverage with regard to Catholic, that whole phrase, even Catholic, schools are almost afraid to assert their ethos, and we often have to give schools that green light, to give them that confidence that actually you're entitled to your ethos. And speaking to what you've already said, David, we would liken the ethos to the lens. And it's through that lens that absolutely everything that happens in your Catholic school is approached. You know, so I know Alan can speak then to the added value piece.
Could we just add one? Sorry, Alan, to interrupt you.
Sorry, David. Yeah.
Could you just expand? Just I think it'd be interesting for the students just even here. You hit on two really topical issues at the moment. The first one was, right, we have the new Admissions Act. I covered it slightly in the previous lecture with them. Just kind of more a tip of the hat to this is a current thing that's going on. But just as regards the Admissions Act and as regards the enrollment policies in schools, would you have received many phone calls or many queries prior to the Act around students being admitted to schools, be they Catholic or not? In other words, how many calls would you have gotten around a problem around admissions, let's say, in your time, I suppose, as regards be they an oversubscribed school or not? What was the context in which these were kind of coming up? And secondly, just as regards the opt-out policies in schools, how much does religious education actually feature as an issue for the management bodies as regards challenges and problems that the schools themselves are encountering. Is it a big one? In my own opinion, I doubt it is a massive problem for many schools, but was it, if you just want, even the two of you want to, because I know with your background as well, Alan, working with CPSMA as well, and now with the patrons body, and Miriam as well, also you're still dealing with these things on a daily basis. Is there anything, statistical landscape wise, that you could give a picture for students today?
Well, if I may jump in, I'd say in terms of queries around admissions, the answer is none. In the thousands upon thousands of calls I took while I was in CPSMA, I didn't receive one on an admissions issue relating to the faith or non-faith of any applicant, pupil or family seeking to come into the school. It just simply didn't feature as a query. Now, Miriam's experience might be different from my own.
No.
And in St. Senan's, certainly, there was no history, and it said we've about 517 schools. There was no history of issues around admissions and faith. Now, there were calls on the opt-in or opt-out issue, and you would have, again, they were rare. The vast majority of these issues are dealt with at a local level quite amicably. And principals and parents simply sit down and talk through what the parents would like. And that can differ from each individual pupil and family will have a different solution, in a sense. And that's where it's better simply for the principal to sit down. Miriam once, and she might talk to this as well, in front of the Oireachtas Committee on Education, talked about how she asked her parents how do they want to opt in, rather than a kind of a negative conversation. To use the local school here as an example, they had a child who was from a Russian Orthodox background, who wasn't going to be joining his schoolmates in making First Communion. But his family wanted him to participate in the event. We're very happy to see him singing in the choir, see him acknowledged during the ceremony and that kind of stuff. And that was all done in accordance with parental wishes and everything else, and facilitated in a very positive way. Other parents in the school didn't want the children being involved at all in any of that, and that was respected too. I think just to pick up what you said about the faith being proposed as opposed to any idea of indoctrination. Indoctrination would be contrary to the Catholic view. And certainly both state and church are in total agreement as to who is the primary educator of children, and that is the parents. Every church document on education going back for centuries has always identified the parents as being the primary educator of their children. And similarly, the Constitution in Articles 42 and 44 nails it, that it is the parents who are the primary educators. Schools, Catholic schools, schools of other faiths, Educate Together schools, everything, they educate the pupils on behalf of the parents. And that is a fully Catholic view. And just again, maybe to pick out some other stuff, education policy in Ireland has been influenced by Catholicism. Now that might seem like a rather plain statement. People can see that maybe as something we need to unpick from New Secular Ireland. But I talk about that influence in a very positive way. It has grounded our education system in a local level. So our schools are governed at a local level by local boards. But another aspect is the primacy given to parents. You see a lot of issues in the UK and US, to take two English-speaking countries, conflicts around school and schooling that we don't have here because the primacy given to the parent as the main educator, both by the church and the state reflecting the church. Other than that, there's another aspect. We talk about the value of ethos. We don't see it in this country because, in a sense, the market is saturated, to use kind of that language, is saturated with Catholic education. In other countries where Catholic schools are in a minority, Catholic education has a tremendously positive reputation. In almost every country where Catholic schools operate, they are represented way out of proportion to their number amongst the top performing schools in those countries. And that goes for countries with very different types of schools or school systems that are owned, let's say. So you could have secular France, where they actually do fund schools with a religious ethos. Although there's certain regulations, more than our own schools, they have to follow. But Catholic schools in France are considered amongst the best. In the United States, it's private schools, certainly, or it's charitably subscribed schools. They too are amongst the best. In the UK, Catholic schools completely dominate the Ofsted top rankings, way out of proportion to their numbers within the UK school system. Now, is that accidental, or what else is going on? The simple truth is that Catholics have been involved in education for over 1,000 years, much longer than 1,000 years. Catholics were the ones who founded the first universities in Europe and founded them very much based on intellectual freedom. That isn't always appreciated either. The universities were very carefully protected to allow the intellectual life, and as David said, that dance between faith and reason to take place. Then bring it back locally, our own Education Act. The Catholic view of education is a holistic one. It was holistic before anybody started talking about holistic. Miriam mentioned as well, it is about the education of the entire person. So intellectual, certainly, yes, but also spiritual, moral, physical, emotional. The Catholic view, and David might have touched on this in some of your lectures, Catholic theology is very embedded with the idea of the incarnational feature. Both Christ was incarnated, but also our incarnational nature as human beings. We're spirit and body incarnated. You can't extrapolate one out. Catholics don't have a view that the mind can stand separate from the body. We're an integrated whole. And that comes true in how we view education. And there in section 9D of the Education Act, you have it, an almost pure statement of Catholic belief around education, or the philosophy of education. It says the purpose of a school is to promote the moral, spiritual, social, and personal development of students and provide health education for them in consultation with their parents and in regard to the characteristic spirit of the school. So there in the Education Act, you can again see the positive Catholic influence coming through, talking about the holistic, the need to educate the entire person. Now, currently you can see education debates in Ireland in the last decade have taken a far more, I'm going to let David come in now when I get to the end of this point, have become far more utilitarian. And we've had previous ministers for education, Richard Bruton and Rory Quinn as well to a certain extent, talking about education almost as training for work. Catholic schools provide a very strong counterbalance to that view. And I will say in particular, you have to acknowledge primary education in Ireland is far more progressive even than post-primary, in the sense that primary education is very focused on the whole development of the entire person in a very balanced way, and more so than post-primary and perhaps even third level as well, present company accepted. So just in terms of ethos is to understand where it all fits in, the whole strands of it, and how the deep thinking in Catholic philosophy and education is present right throughout this conversation we're having today. David, I'll let you come in, sorry.
No, that's brilliant, Alan. That's really good. And Miriam, I suppose like the same can be said, Alan, as well, of Europe in general, of the influence of Catholicism across the board as regards its frameworks. And I covered we covered, interesting, Miriam, when you talk about the situation you proposed there, and Alan, around the opt-in and opt-out aspect, it really reflects what we covered in our course here around the Department of Education's document on papers of pluralism, but rather the document Progress to Date and Future Directions. And in that document, they provide 5 key principles, which were taken from schools' experiences of actually dealing with inclusion at a local level. And sure, look, as you would know it, like you said already, about 90% of the schools around the country are Catholic schools. So de facto, where did these good applications of inclusion come from? They came from the vast majority of Catholic schools. And what you had in the situation that you flagged there was you had good communication happening between all stakeholders. You had a clarity of rights and the responsibilities of everybody involved. And you really tried to nurture a good relationship between the various parties. And there was an open conversation and a willingness to compromise. So there was actually a flexibility happening at a local level as best possible to try and keep everybody happy, and particularly the student, the parents happy in the situation. So that's another aspect there from what we covered in our course today that you could bring to the conversation around yourselves, around your understanding of ethos and how it happens and its effects at a practical level. And I just find it interesting that the fact that it wasn't a big feature, the admissions part in general. So it's all very relative to what we were covering here today. But look, I think we should continue on. It was nice to have that segue, but I think we'll move on.
I suppose on the next slide here, Alan has spoken to this already, but if there's anything you'd like to add, Alan, at this point. Now, I can't hear Alan.
You're after muting.
Apologies. Just to pick up on a point you made earlier, Miriam, when somebody joins a school, so some of the students we're talking to today, when they go out and join a school, they will find an existing ethos in the school, but they themselves will then contribute to that. They don't simply arrive in a school to be, you won't be arriving to be a receiver of that school's ethos, solely a receiver. There'll be an interplay between the ethos that's there and you arriving. So for instance, if you're bringing a very particular, maybe ecological concern or concern for social justice, the school and to your teaching practice, that too will be then end up being blended into the life of the school, being blended into its characteristic, spirit and ethos. And hence that becomes a legacy you as a teacher will leave behind in that school as part of its ethos. And you have no idea how that will flourish your development over your time there or even after you leave. I'm just picking out those because they're very topical in terms of the current Pope and his emphasis on both of those issues. And they're obviously very, very relevant to where we are in the world today. So that might be something that you as new teachers will bring that will add to the ethos, and that interplay between the existing ethos of the school and how you as a teacher will add and help develop that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a very real reality for the teachers going out, Alan and Miriam. I think that so there's a very strong likelihood that they could have people in the class or numerous pupils in the class that are in temporary accommodation even.
Yeah.
And displacement would be a large aspect of what they could be actually encountering out there. So it's interesting to note, even in Irish context, like the likes of Peter McFerry and all these people, they're Catholic priests, they're coming from a Catholic philosophy and of life, and that too impacts on how we educate.
Can I just give two stories? I give this when I'm training boards of management down in Munster, because I'm trying to illustrate the deeper level ethos has to get to. I was dealing with a principal over on the eastern side of the country. You had a pupil who had been suspended already 7 times. There was severe difficulties with his behaviour, including physical assaults on staff and on other pupils. And now I was in CPSMA, and I gave him all the advice we'd go through and went through, chapters 10, 11 and 12, the NEWB guidelines and developing code of behaviour for schools, talking through his own code of behaviour and everything else. Because at this stage, the advice would have been maybe veering towards expulsion. This principal said, okay, Alan, I hear what you're saying to me, but I'm not going to expel this child because every one of this kid's brothers are already in prison. And if I expel him, that's what I doom him to. The background he comes from, the area he comes from, this school is his only chance. This is what the principal said to me. I will not stand before the throne of God on the day I die and defend expelling this child because this is a Catholic school. I hear what you're saying, I understand your advice, but I'm going to find some other way to deal with this situation. Now, I was genuinely moved by, and I rang him several months later and it had worked out. They had developed other ways of dealing with the child's education and had successfully, and I talked to him last year and the child had made it to post-primary education. That's a wonderful example of a principal really thinking through what the ethos of a school means. In terms of dealing with colleagues, I had another principal rang me one time, a teacher with a severe drink problem. There had already been several incidents, and on this day she had turned up to the school very obviously drunk. Again, I went through all the standard advice in terms of disciplinary procedures, but also the well-being of the staff member and that kind of thing, counselling service that's available to teachers, directed towards Medmark and so on and so forth. And she listened to all that advice, said, okay, Alan, now, how do I apply mercy? What a fantastic question, caught me completely on the hop. But again, you had a principal who was really trying to think through, we're a Catholic school, I'm dealing with a staff member who is obviously well in breach of the disciplinary code that would be expected of teachers. But she was still trying to think through, how do I, as a principal of a Catholic school, actually treat with my colleague? And I just thought, there's ethos on a much deeper level than just looking at religious instruction or iconography or prayer within the school life. I think just before we move off on this slide, you'll see there spirit of partnership. We've talked a good bit about that. That third point there is something we shouldn't back away from. It's easy to do, as I've done, talk about the Catholic philosophy of education, but if we don't talk about God, and this is the thing, any school can talk to a child about social justice, and many do, and do it really well, non-Catholic schools, and all those things. The Catholic school seeks to do all that, give them awareness of the environment, of social justice, broader issues, but finally to make them aware that we are more than just material substance, to introduce them to the spiritual perspective and invite them into that in a very positive way. And that it's a philosophy of life grounded in and inspired by the belief in God and the teaching of Jesus Christ, and that it's invitational, but that it opens up to the student that other aspect of being human, that spiritual vista, that is, again, a part of the entire human person. Just, I think, unless anybody else wants to come in there.
No, I think that's very strong and very good. I think we'll keep moving forward, I think, a little bit now.
Okay.
And we'll see again more with the wider conversation again around ethos.
Mm-hmm. So I suppose really it's the reason we have this slide here is just to remind you that it is more than just the preparation for a sacramental preparation that goes on in schools, where they are quite a key piece. There is far more to a Catholic ethos than those points. Okay, so we're going to look, I suppose, really your focus on recruitment, and having sat on many a selection panel over the years, as I know Alan has as well, we would have an insight into, so I would have sat on panels for larger schools, for Desh schools, for Gael schools, for your small rural school, so we've both sat on quite a variety of selection panels. The recruitment procedures are set out. So a selection panel normally is made up of the chairperson of the board of management, who don't presume is going to be a priest. In fact, the vast majority of chairpersons nowadays are actually lay people. Okay, so you're chairperson of your board of management. It's usually the principal of the school, and then what's called an independent assessor. That independent assessor is actually taken from a list that's created by the diocese. So it is somebody who has not, normally it's another principal. Usually it's another principal and has nothing to do with this school per se. So they're the three people that you'll normally see in front of you at an interview process. So they don't make up the rules as they go along. I know there's quite a lot of I don't know, kind of, chat that goes about these selection panels, but they're actually governed by very strict rules and procedures, and they're set out in Circular 44, 2019. And within that procedure, you will see particularly the advertisement piece, the school with the Catholic patron is actually entitled to ask for relevant documentation, with regard to, so the wording is in there, but a certificate to teach Catholic religious education for schools under Catholic patronage. You'll see that in an advertisement. They're entitled to ask for that. And you should actually, if that's what's looked for, you need to make sure that you have that and that you show that you have that. And also, a selection panel is entitled to ask an ethos question. And that is something, again, with the admissions policy, that schools are actually becoming more conscious of. And normally, in my experience, it's usually the chairperson, whether, religious or lay person, who would actually ask that question in an interview process. Alan, would you like to speak to your experiences on selection panels?
Just to back up everything you said, typically the ethos question falls to the chair of the school would normally ask that. But just to be aware that in a lot of dioceses, the independent assessor as well is appointed by the education office, so the patron's office. So that the chairperson is also a patron's nominee on the board of management. So both those people will be bringing, I suppose, a patron's perspective in that sense to bear on the interview as well. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, they'd be very conscious of their role to maintain the ethos. And what I would say about a selection panel is they don't know anything about you, right? Normally, they've never met you before. If you're lucky enough to have subbed in a particular school and know that it's a fit for you, that's great. But, they're not, and they have a specific set of criteria set out, which we will be going through in a few moments. So they're anxious to get this right. They're anxious to get the right person, the right fit for their school, speaking back to what we've already said, because in bringing somebody new into a school, it develops, it enhances the ethos of the school. And that's their main aim in the recruitment process. So here we have a sample letter of application. Don't underestimate the value of an application letter, please. I would say that you have your standard application form, which I would say the phrase clear and concise and to the point, all of the pieces that you put in there. There's nothing worse than going through an application form and not being able to extrapolate the information that you're looking for. But equally, as an application letter, it gives us an insight. It's your chance to shine. It's your chance to show us something of yourself. So you'll get the factual piece, and then as we read down through it, give us a little sense of your particular interests. Because, okay, the reality is that in some schools, for example, a board might identify gaps. So we need somebody with a particular interest in music. We need somebody with a particular interest in sport. We need somebody with a particular interest in the environment, which is a big one, I have to say. And usually it's music and the environment, or sport and the environment. But don't be offended then going forward if you're not the person they choose, because you may have had a hugely excelled at sport, but that may not be what they're looking for. So you are at this point, you know, able to show your particular interests. And what I would also say in your application form, or sorry, your application letter, let them know you know something about their school. Let them know that you've actually you actually want to. If I see a generic application letter, I'm thinking, well, this student, this person, this teacher is maybe has put out 40 applications. Now that may be true, but if it's coming to my school, it's personal to me, and I want to make sure that this person wants to work in my school. And therefore, it's really important that I get a sense that this person has actually looked at my school, researched my school, and get some sense of the school that they are applying to. Would you like to add anything there, Alan?
Just to back up what you're saying there, and the generic letter thing can be painful, because it can be painful, obvious it's generic. It does a candidate a disservice. It's worthwhile making the effort to actually individually make sure the letter is properly targeted to that particular school. I would say, and you can see there in Miriam's sample letter there, the second paragraph, you're nailing a lot of stuff, my qualification, my grade, whatever else. You will see in the ad certain criteria that the selection board are going to be looking for. You should try and headline the fact that you meet all those criteria in the second or third paragraph of your letter. You should make it easy for a selection board. You have to remember, they could be looking at 40 or 50 applications. They're trying to whittle it down to just a number of candidates, maybe 6 or 7, that they're going to actually invite to interview. You want to make that cut. And one way to do it is just to make sure it's easy for them to see that you meet the criteria. There's nothing worse than having to sit down on a selection board and do a bit of detective work with a letter, trying to figure out, does this person or do they not actually meet what we're looking for? So headline it. And then, as Miriam said, yeah, do make sure at least that you've looked up the website, or you've checked out, Google search it in Google News to see if there's anything about the school up there, and make some reference to it. It signals you've made an effort. You've been interested. And it's very positive, and it makes it easy then to select you as a candidate or to be selected for interview.
Yeah, because I once, talked to 40 applicants. I once had over 100 applicants for a job once. And what you do when you have a lot of applicants, you do up a grid, and you have your selection criteria at the top, and you run through them. And at the end of the day, if you've not made it easy, if you've not been clear, if you've not, hit all those points in a very clear way, the selection panel don't actually have the bandwidth to take and try and figure out, well, does that mean this or does that mean that? If you've not made it clear, a selection panel generally don't actually have the time to try and find the information. It shouldn't be shouldn't be a difficult process for them.
And just to flag on this template application, obviously students wouldn't be using paragraph 4 prior to participating in this course, because all of you would have been taking this as your undergraduate course, just in the template. But all the rest of that letter seems really, really strong and really positive. I think this is a really invaluable resource for students when they qualify going out. I think it's really brilliant. So you should really count yourselves lucky, guys, to actually getting this wisdom, because you can count on it that in other colleges, I doubt very much they're getting this. So thanks from Miriam for putting this together for you. I think, and Alan as well, is brilliant. Thanks very much.
So we're going to work through now some, really the criteria. We mentioned criteria, okay? So it's not to be put off really by this section either, because at the end of the day, you are starting out. And in my own experience, I've always preferred to get a newly qualified teacher into my school. I've always preferred somebody who, who is, I suppose one of the words I would use around the teachers that I like coming into my school, somebody with humility. I don't need somebody coming into the school who thinks they know it all. Yes, you're qualified. Yes, well done in your application. Well done on the result that you got in your final exams. But that is only just preparing you. When you get out into school life, into working in a school, nothing prepares you for that. Nothing. And what you do is you will gain experience. You will learn from others. You will learn from your mistakes. You will learn from your experiences, and you will grow as a teacher. And it's how you approach those situations that I'm most interested in the beginning. Because if you think you know it all, then you're actually going to be in for a really rough ride. There's no easy way of putting it, or a simpler way of putting it. So it's be honest, show a bit of humility in your application process, in your interview process. You're not maybe going to tick all the boxes, but if you shine in a particular way to show an openness, to show a practical sense of, I understand, what's going on in your school, I can add to it. That's probably ticking the biggest box we'll have on any particular day through a selection process. So obviously qualifications, you'll give us whatever, they're factual. Make sure they're straightforward. Make sure that you've actually make them clear. As Alan has said, don't make us go dig for them. Make it clear up front. When you're filling out that application form, fill all of the sections honestly, okay, and fully. And if you're not probated, that's fine. Newly qualified generally aren't. It's not essential to be, but to clearly mark any academic qualifications that you have is obviously most important. When you're coming out first, don't imagine that getting a permanent job is the most important thing straight away. Oftentimes, you're far better off subbing in different schools. And the reason for that is you will get experience of different contexts. It's not everybody actually would like the idea of working in a rural school. It's not everybody would want to work in an urban school. So if you actually sub in different schools, you will actually see what is your fit. What do you like? You get experience, you get on a practical level, you'll be in different settings, you'll be watching how different places do things differently. And again, you'll get a better sense of yourself as a teacher. And yourself as, I suppose your strengths, your weaknesses, and what it is that you bring to the table, which then informs your applications going forward, your going through a selection process, what your selling points, I suppose, what it is that are your strengths, what it is you bring to the table. Because if you're not honest and you say, I'm this, I'm that, I love this, I love that, then you may be offered a job that you actually don't like, that you don't want, and that you're not a fit for. So that honesty is hugely important. So I have down here on experience. Obviously, we're looking at experience, but your teaching practice actually, speaks to your experience as well. It may be something you do alongside this. It may be some voluntary work that you do. It may be something that you do in your summer break. So it's not necessarily all about. Obviously, you're not going to have years of experience if you're newly qualified, but it's not to feel intimidated by that. And it's, as I have said already, I would often go for the newly qualified teacher because they can often show an openness to development and learning and become a fit for your school very quickly. Alan, have you anything you'd like to add to that?
No, just actually, well, to pick up on one small point you made there, you're talking about selling. I've used to prepare people for interviews. So the first thing to remember is you're selling a product, and it's a product you're most familiar with. It's yourself. To think of it that way, you have to sell yourself to, as almost a product. Now, I don't mean to turn people into things or something, but you've got to remember you're making a sales pitch. So in one sense, as Miriam, you've got to get this happy medium between showing a little bit of humility, but also not hiding your light under the bushel. Obviously being honest. And just to say, yeah, that is important. Subbing beforehand or getting some fixed term contracts in other schools or a variety of school settings, you've got to remember, once you get a permanent position, it becomes a little bit more difficult to move at that, right? Because you kind of, you're there. So you want to make sure you're comfortable in the particular type of school you're working in. And there are a huge variety out there. So something can be a good way of actually just seeing, well, what am I comfortable in? Inner city, jet school, large rural school, small rural school, school with a strong emphasis on special education, need education. So just, you can experiment around in these first few years.
Yeah, and actually on that, one of the first questions you're normally, and I've sat on too many than I care to remember, selection panels, but one of the first questions you're normally asked is, tell us a little bit about yourself. And oftentimes the person's reaction to that, sometimes you can get the, did you not read the CV face, and it's not about that. Actually, that question is for you. It's about giving you an opportunity to speak of something we know you're an expert on, and it's a way of getting you to relax. So again, I come back to my earlier point. The selection panel are actually doing their best to get your best out of you, to see who you really are. Okay, so yes, we've read your CV. Yes, we know about you, but we want you to tell us in your own words. And again, it's about getting you relaxed on your favorite topic yourself. Okay.
It's about making sure you're not a robot.
Yeah. Okay. So again, moving on our criteria, we're looking at knowledge of, so school policies and procedures. An awful lot of schools tell an awful lot about themselves online. So don't be afraid to do a little bit of research. See, can you talk to people, maybe teachers who've worked there, etc. And, it's all about, so we have all the practical stuff here, to show that you can actually engage with formal processes, planning, all of that piece. And then, I suppose really the most important part here, and that's why I have it in red, is you need to be a team player, okay? Schools exist on huge goodwill. Okay, so don't think you're going to be clocking in at 9:10 or 9:20 in the morning and waving goodbye at maybe 3:10 if it takes 10 minutes to pack your bag in the afternoon. That's not what schools are about. I suppose the most important thing I'm looking for in somebody, and I know this on all of the selection panels I've been on, is that I have somebody who's a team player. I don't need somebody who's going to go into their classroom and have it all singing, all dancing, and have it all fabulous, and then close the door to colleagues. Let me tell you, your colleagues will be your strength. Your relationship with your colleagues, with the management in the school, that will be your strength. You will not have, it's not like it is in the movies. Okay, when you go into a classroom, you'll have good days and you'll have some very rough days. And that may be because of where you're at or where your students are at, or maybe somebody has come to the door with another problem to add to. Your strength is in your relationships. And we go back to our ethos, our relationships with those who we work with. So I need to know that you will be a team player, because we have to work as a team. Schools wouldn't exist if we all just worked in our own little independent republic of first class, where I do my thing and I'm better than everybody else. We need to collaborate. We need to plan together. And that team piece is hugely important. So then we have, the curricular skills. This is stuff you can speak to because it's all your practical subject areas that you've actually worked on while in college. Maybe it's while you're in a teaching placement. Maybe you found that you have an aptitude for sport, for music, whatever. This is where the curricular skill piece will come through. Is there anything you'd like to add there, Alan?
Just on the team player thing, when I was obviously in primary school, or Miriam, there was no S&As, so teachers were on their own. It was just a teacher at the top of the classroom, and it was their little kingdom in a sense. Now, we wouldn't have kids have seen that cooperation behind the scenes that Miriam was talking about, But today you're going to be working in classrooms with other people in the room. So SNAs, obviously, and just that can be a challenge. When I was in my kind of mid to late 20s, the company I worked for bought a supermarket. They'd never bought a supermarket before, and I was sent out to run it, which was intimidating because I had a lot of staff out there who were in their 50s, who were very experienced and knew all about running supermarkets. And you land in and whatever, I was supposed to be in charge. But similarly, you can be a newly qualified teacher heading out in your mid 20s or early 20s, landing in a classroom, maybe with two SNAs, one of them age 45 and the other one 54, who've been there in the school for yonks and who are old hands at this stage. But you are the leader in that classroom. But it has to be leading as part of a team. It's not, you in command SNAs do to do. You're going to have to get a collaborative relationship going with these older staff members and more experienced, and to recognize that and to be able to work in cooperation with people like that. Or similarly, you might be there after a few years and a new SNA joins the school, and then you have somebody like yourself maybe who's younger and, as Miriam said, may not have the requisite humility. So you've got to think you're going to be working as a team member in a classroom, but you as teacher are going to have a very important role. And it's how to work as a team with people in your own room as well is going to be critical, as well as your teaching colleagues in the other classrooms. And then you have the learning support side of things as well, which will involve a huge degree of collaboration. Mm-hmm. That part, you need to mention that if you don't get a question on that in your interview, at the stage, and I'll talk about this later on in terms of the ethos question, you need to fit in where you talk about how good a team player you are. Because it's a box you need to tick during the interview. If someone doesn't ask that question, you need to say it at some point, fit it in, okay?
Okay, so just one point here, your quality of your application form or your CV. I had, you'll see there in red, principal, not principal. You would be surprised, as a selection panel, it grates on a selection panel to see spelling mistakes in particular. Okay, so please, have a trusted friend, have somebody who you trust and know to look over your letter of application, to look over your CV, because if you couldn't be bothered to get the spelling right, and let me tell you, it just, to be honest, if I had 100 applications in front of me, as I've had in the past, and I got principal, PLE, I'm putting that to one side. That person didn't show enough evidence to care, to get it right, to take their time, that attention to detail. And maybe I'm old and bitter, but I just can't abide that at all. And I know there's nobody I've ever sat on a selection panel with anybody who has ever been able to cope with that. David, do you wish to add to that?
Yeah. I'd like to say a bit of common sense goes on. How could you ever expect someone to teach any basic grammar or punctuation to a child if they can't themselves execute the basic functions of the English language? And I'd like to flag that you can all really begin with when you're writing my assignments to think about punctuation, grammar, and spelling. There's a wonderful, wonderful tool on Microsoft Word, if you haven't discovered it, called Spell Check. It's a phenomenal tool. It will underline, redline any words that don't exist for you. And always have a critical friend.
Yes.
Always have a critical friend. And I'd suggest that to you as well, like Miriam was saying, when you're actually out in a school, that when you talk about your actual interrelationships with everybody else, having a critical friend in a school is also important. It will keep you in check. It will keep your skills up. It will keep everything. The one thing we can't do, the most negative thing that could ever impact, and it's the same with sports teams, it's the same with any kind of team, a kind of passive inability to strive for a better way of doing things, a complacency. And I think that's probably a big appeal as well that can come in with a new teacher into a school. Why I think Miriam, that are also very open. It's not only the openness, but you're also bringing with any new techniques, any new styles, any new strategies that are coming out from the teaching colleges into the school. And yeah, that's going to be uncomfortable for some of the staff, the senior staff members that are there, that might be used to their way of doing things. They might look at you and go, sure, it's scandalous. They're all doing these KWL charts and they're all this whole thing. Whatever happened today where I could just take in and light a fire in the classroom and teach them how all the elements work. These kind of aspects of things that just don't seem to flow or float the boat. But you're an important dimension to a school in that way. But I'd cry if I actually got an application letter for a post and it was directed to the principal, like a guide and mode of existence in the world.
It has happened more often than I care to remember, I'll be honest. But just to pick up on what you said there, David, you remember the principal and the chairperson of this school have faith in you. They've chosen you for this role. So, they've chosen you because they liked your ideas. So don't be afraid to share those ideas. Remember, the principal is going to have your back because they know you have this ability. They know that this is where you're coming from, So while we have humility and an openness to change and openness to grow, I suppose being a good listener is more important than you'll ever know.
If you just remember, guys, sorry, this Miriam and Alan won't be aware.
Okay, David,
we think back to those who were doing the cultural diversity and religious pluralism module with me. We had a module on dialogue and interreligious dialogue, and we talked about one of the most fundamental aspects of dialogue, which is the heart of every team that operates, is that inter-dialogue, not a kind of passive thing, but you bring yourself to the conversation, but listening and actively listening is different. And I used the example of Jimi Hendrix in White Men Can't Jump. And I was like, you had a black guy driving the car and you had a white guy in the car and they had Jimi Hendrix on the radio. And the black guy was like, no, you don't hear Jimmy. So you don't actually hear him. And by that, he's actually saying you're not actively listening because you're not actually able to empathize and gather yourself from the perspective in which the artist is working. The same way when it comes to actually your interrelationship and interpersonal skills in a school, there's no generic form of teacher. There's no universal form of teacher. Every teacher is different. So it'd be a pointless and frugal conversation to have an interrelationship with people who aren't different. So difference is a really important part in our schools and how you come out, because everybody is different. So how you communicate that and contribute that to a school, sell that and promote that. Actually, a better word would be a case rather than sell is promote yourself, I think, and promote your skills that you'll learn, because even though there'd be 300 to 400 of you graduating from PATS every year, that's 400 individuals, and all of you have something different to bring to a school. And it's about finding the school wants the right fit for them. And most importantly, you have a life to live. You don't want to be miserable going somewhere every day. So make sure that you find the right fit for you. And I think it's a really important part that you don't start spouting lies in the quest to get a position, and really just kind of go, well, life is bigger than my job, number one. Even though I have a strong vocation to be a teacher, and I spent the last 4 years working in this training to be a teacher, or to at least begin my career in teaching, your own well-being and all of your learning through this very challenging time now is of the utmost importance. And you'll find that if you're in a space and you're around a space, you see it now with your friends even, if you have that support network in the school, it's just invaluable. And it's part of being a community and a learning community. And that's what a Catholic school is a learning community, and it's embedded within that wider community of the parish. So all of the whole things there is the interpersonal partnership that exists, and we covered that in the lectures as well. And this idea of civic partnership, which was very big in Irish society for many years, and it's kind of wavered a little bit now, but civic partnership was massive between organizational structures and institutional structures in education, which is why you had the impact on the Education Act. But it happens at the local level. And always remember, probably the biggest cherry on top, Alan kind of flagged it earlier about the idea of local governance, but it's the principle of subsidiarity. And that principle of subsidiarity comes from Catholic philosophy, and it's embedded in the European context, but also then within your school. So the idea that you're being entrusted in your own classroom to be capable of making local decisions in that room, that transfers the whole way up along to board of management, the whole way up to the wider structures themselves. So the key thing, what I'm really trying to say is that even though you're one particular person, the things that you do has a massive chance of impacting the universal. So when you come to a school, you want to start on the right foot. You want it to be the right way. So it all starts when you start penning that application. And that's where you start, because you're opening up the door for communication and relationship at that point with that school. So you want to enter into it with a positive and open mindset. But also, if you're not bothered to read through a letter twice, go off, find something else to do. You shouldn't be doing what you're doing.
Remember, you're being entrusted with a group of children, and you know, if you're going to be unhappy, that's going to come across, and the children are not going to get the best they should be, and they should be getting that. And again, when I go back to when you're having a bad day, it's about having your colleagues to support you through those days, you know, on a very basic level, in my experience. So if we move on then to the types of questions that you can be asked, obviously I've flagged the first one, tell us about yourself. You know, we're obviously interested in your knowledge of the curriculum, your classroom management, all of those pieces. You see parents there. One of the most difficult aspects of your job will be dealing with parents. You know, you'll have parents who will expect more than you think they should, and you will have parents who really, look, the bottom line is, right, it doesn't really matter how good you are. It doesn't really matter how brilliant you are. There will be parents who will not be happy with you. You will arrive in someday and you'll get a 12-page letter. You will arrive in someday and some parent will have slipped through the front door and be standing there, and they will tear strips off you. My advice to you is, do not take it personally. Right? My advice is that, you know, I'm 27 whatever years teaching. They will make great shoes from my skin because it has developed a leathery context, right? I always tell the story, and Alan will recognize this because I've often told this to principals. I don't know if you're familiar enough with the fabulous movie that was The Penguins of Madagascar. Right, or Madagascar. So in the very last scene, you know, they're all talking about really, you know, thought-provoking movies. I'll bring it down to the basics. Working with children will do that to you. But in one of the last scenes, the penguins are standing on the beach and the ship is sailing off into the distance. And one penguin turns to the other, the boss penguin. He goes, "Boss, is it not about to run out of diesel?" And the boss penguin goes, "Smile and wave, boys, smile and wave." So why am I telling you this? When a parent comes in and they're roaring blue murder at you, smile and wave internally. Don't smile and wave at them, right? Because nothing you say at that point is going to make a difference. In fact, the more you try and defend the 5 maths questions you gave the night before that the parent couldn't understand, the more you try and defend the disciplinary action that you had taken against their child, in fact, if you open your mouth at all at that point, it's going to make it worse. My advice is, have those little stock answers. Listen to the parent. Just listen to them. And then you say to them, "I have a class to teach. You know what? I will talk to you later about that. I heard what you said. I hear what you're saying, but I can't just talk to you at the moment. I'll talk to you at 3 o'clock. I'll talk to you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. You don't need to react straight away. You don't need to have all the answers. In fact, I can guarantee you'll find yourself where you don't even know what this parent is talking about, and you might have to go back in and check something. You'll say, "Do you know what, could you please leave that with me? I've heard what you had to say and I will get back to you on that." Okay? What that means is you go and you talk to a colleague, you go and you talk to the principal, you go and you talk to somebody, you go and you figure out what exactly is this parent looking for. And then when you bring them back in the second time, invariably, and in my experience, they have calmed down. And because they've calmed down, then you're able to put across your side. And for God's sake, if you're wrong and when you're wrong, don't try and defend it. Just go, hands up. I could have handled that better. Because if you try to defend the indefensible, you're only making a bigger hole for yourself. So don't go there. Okay. So that's my gem of information on that piece. Alan wants to add to it.
I just want to say to the students, you need to take those last couple of minutes of Miriam's contribution. You're going to be asked a question at some stage in the interview. How would you deal with an angry parent or a difficult parent? Or there'll be some form of question like that. What Miriam has just said to you there, that's your answer, right? You've got to get elements of what Miriam's just spoken with there into your answer, because the principal is looking for somebody who isn't going to take an angry parent, which is a small incident, let's say, and turn it into a massive drama, right? We don't need the final act of some Wagnerian opera occurring in the school, right? So the principal wants somebody who has a little bit of nous, a little bit of cop on, and how to handle these situations. So these little difficulties that arise don't turn into full-scale war, right? So that's key thing. They don't want somebody on the staff who's going to cause them untold bother with the parent body, because their lives are also short, right? Just on that, you're going to be asked questions throughout the interview. Listen to this is my pet peeve when I'm interviewing. People are asked a question, tell me about a time you had to deal with a difficult parent. Tell me about a time you had to deal with a challenging colleague, something like that. They're asking you for a story, okay? When you get to tell me about a time, they want a story. And remember, we're Irish, okay? We're a narrative people. We actually take in information through stories and we communicate through stories. That's how we operate, okay? Very good politicians in Ireland will always understand that. If they go onto prime time and spout out a load of statistics, everybody's eyes glaze over and they stop listening. If they start talking about, let's say famously, a man with 2 pints in his hands, and Kenny talking about that, but you tell a story, that's how you communicate. That's how we communicate as a people. So when you're interview, if you're asked to tell me about a time, then tell a story. Don't go through the principles of how you do it. And it's perfectly fine for a newly qualified teacher to say, well, look, at my teaching practice to date or my teaching experience to date, I haven't actually come across a situation. But can I tell you about a time I worked in a bar and had a very angry customer, or I was working as a waitress and a very angry customer. And I think, dealing with parents, I apply the same principles. And then you stitch in exactly what Miriam just said there, okay? Remember those questions, because the principal's trying to figure out, is this somebody who's going to keep things calm, or is this somebody who's going to cause me no end of bother, right? Either with staff or with parents. So you need to think through those answers and have a story. And again, if you're newly qualified, you mightn't have a story from a school, but it's perfectly fine to talk about a time I worked in a restaurant and there was somebody working with me who was very awkward, and this is how I dealt with the situation. And in school, I bring the same things to bear because this is what I believe, ABC, and you go through what Miriam talked about.
Yeah,
That's your answer.
Yeah, it's all about trying to get a sense of how you will deal with a difficult person. Because it doesn't really matter if it's a parent or grandparent or a child. It's how you will react. And I suppose it's a hands up when you're wrong, and it's about keeping the situation calm. It's about not, if the tone of voice is high coming at you, you keep it low. You keep it calm. You have to, not reacting is the best thing to do. It's about, I hear you. I understand you have an issue. I'm taking that on board, and I will talk to you about that at this time. It's about not, because if you kind of say, look, I'm not talking to you about this, I have a class to teach. That's the wrong way to act in a situation like that. It's about, listen, I hear you. I understand that you have a difficulty, but I'm just about to, so it's about the tone. It's about how you're reacting to that. Because remember, if you settle this, which in the process of dealing with parents, you're first, right? You're front line. If you settle this, the principal doesn't have to bother with it. The principal doesn't have to get involved. And remember, it's the principal who's in an interview situation. They're the ones trying to find out, is this person going to make my life easy, or is this person going to make my life difficult? Okay.
Is this person capable? And I suppose it's I suppose to think about it in another way, guys, is like, all of you have probably worked in bars, restaurants, like Alan was saying there, and a school serves the community. So in some respects, the skills and traits that you've acquired in dealing with the general public in other services are relatable to those contexts as well. And another trick for you in the interview as well, and all of you are probably aware of it at this stage, but it's probably just no harm remembering, refresh yourself. Take a breath before you answer. No matter how fast you think you're speaking in your head, you're probably speaking, how slow you think you're speaking, you're probably speaking way faster to the people listening, because you're pumped, you have a bit more blood flowing through the system. Also, one response actually, and it was said to me afterwards, a year into my job, it was discussed, one of the key fundamental things that got me a job before was I asked them to clarify what they meant by the question. As in, could you clarify for that for me, please? Sorry. Or don't be afraid if you don't get the question, ask again, because you don't want to go on and start talking about, well, I washed the clothes and blah, 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 blah. Well, no, sir. we were talking about when you bought the coat, not what you've done after 70 wears. So like it's about having clarity on what you're actually answering. And the story is important, but you'll find yourself, if you're settled in and if you relax into the interview, these things will happen naturally. And I suppose I'll give you the one thing I always do at the start of an interview always is I try to make the people laugh, right? And I'm not talking about coming in with your boxers on your head. I'm talking about coming in and, for instance, I was in a panel. It'd be a similar setup for you when you go into your teaching, for your teaching interview. It was the same when I was going from my post in university. There was about five or six people per person panel. I walked in, God, Jesus, I'm before the High Court here today, or something. So it was some kind of passage to break the tension, because when you walk in, you're a stranger walking into the room. You're walking in yourself, going, oh, this is a big board table, or this is a big room, and so there's a daunting. So this laughing is the medicine. It's a medicine just to cut tension, and it's not about making it stupid. But if it feels like it's in the room, make them laugh. Give them something. Show that you're actually a person that I could have a cup of tea with at lunchtime.
Yeah. But don't be hard on yourself. I mean, one of the things I would say, as in my experience on a selection panel, is we understand that you're nervous. We understand that you're under pressure. In fact, one of the best teachers I have ever employed for myself was, didn't necessarily come across well in the first 5-10 minutes of an interview. They were so nervous, but they got there and eventually were able to show me the kind of person they were, and I understood that they would be a fit for us. So don't be hard on yourself. Slow it down, listen to the question, clarify the question if necessary, take your time, and just try and give us a sense of who you really are. And then don't be offended if you don't get the job. It just means you weren't a fit. That's all. It's nothing personal. It's just that you were not a fit. Now, what I would say too, going back to previously about getting subbing, the beauty of subbing is you also develop a reputation. And in doing so, then a teacher sitting in front of me, who I've had in the school, who I know is a team player, who I know will work hard, obviously I can't unknow those things. So, don't be offended. If you don't get the job, it's because you just were not a fit. So I suppose we better move on, or we could be here all day discussing anecdotes. One of the focuses, as we said, or our focus today, is looking at that ethos piece. And here we have a selection of, ethos questions that could possibly be asked, or I have asked, or, we've gathered from others who have asked down through the years. So give you some sense of, how, that you can speak to your specialism. It's going to enhance your application here. It's going to give you a sense and an understanding of the insight to your values and how they speak to to the question being asked. It's how you're going to treat your colleagues. That we've talked about this, how you're going to be part of a team, and you'll be able to speak to this, in depth. It won't be just one of these learned off answers where, I'm going to be asked an ethos question and and this is the answer I'll give to that, and it's kind of generic piece. You will actually be able to give a depth to your answer as a result of your specialism that will really give the selection panel a sense of who you are and what it is that you have to offer the school. So you really have a huge advantage here, because as we said, this ethos piece, where it may be only one question or maybe, teased out, it's actually a very key question in an interview, because we get a sense, will this person be able to teach through this lens? Will this person, do they understand what it means, what ethos means, and how everything flows from it in my school as a Catholic school? So don't underestimate that question. Don't underestimate that key question. Remember, again, it's the chairperson that's actually asking this question. They have a vested interest here in how you answer this. And again, you speak to your specialism here, the work that you're doing here, and it will enrich the answer that you give, and therefore will give you that added advantage in this situation.
And just to clarify, Miriam, that the chairperson has a vested interest in it because they're the representative of the patron.
Oh, absolutely, and it's about representing the patron in maintaining the ethos of the school.
And there's just 3 questions there, even that is standing out to me, just even from your 2 modules that you've done in your specialism. For instance, the social justice module that you covered with Anne, for instance, that DESH school question there. So in what way do you feel the ethos of the school informs the way in which we meet the needs of our community? You can draw on all your social justice material there. In the material that you were covering with me in my module, you have, well, how do we cater for pupils in our class who are not Catholic? We've done a whole lecture on inclusivity and religious education. We also, the whole module itself looked at how you can ensure that your classroom and school promotes respect for cultural, ethnicity and religious diversity. So you have a real wellspring of material to draw from in your 2 specialism modules.
Okay.
Yeah, just to back up what the other 2 have said, this question is a real opportunity for you to show a little bit of yourself. Maybe more so than other questions are going to be asked. There'll be a few of those. Just tell me about yourself questions at the start of the interview. Talk to me about how you deal with parents or other staff. They're opportunities to talk very much about how you're going to operate. The ethos question, again, is another way of doing that. As Miriam said, like, how am I going to operate through the lens of ethos in a complete way throughout the school day, and in how I deal with everybody. So you can talk about yourself. David talked about the specialisms there. Miriam mentioned it earlier, like the environmental thing is a box that schools want to tick now.
Hugely.
No, I don't, you know what I mean? So if it hasn't come up in any, if in the answer to this question, that's where you get that in. That's where you talk a little bit about that as well. And you frame it as being part of the ethos. But you are also then providing that interview board with another piece of information about you. You're interested in the environmental stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's back to, like, this is a question where you're going to have an opportunity to talk about the kind of person you are, the values you're going to bring to bear on the school, how you're going to add to the life of the school, how you're going to contribute to the characteristic spirit, the ethos of the school. So this is a really important question in an interview. It's important that you've thought out how you're going to talk through it. And yeah, certainly the specialism you've had there, the language you're going to gain from that, the knowledge you have from that, certainly be positive about putting that forward in this answer, because it will stand to you. Absolutely.
Okay. So I suppose what, highlights of what we said would be, find out about the school. Make sure that when you're coming in to interview for my school, that you actually have bothered to look up about my school, have bothered to find out. And, you're referring to the status as part of the community. This speaks to what David has already mentioned. Schools have a very important role. And oftentimes they're the centers of communities. The local shop may have closed, the local post office may have closed, but when we all get back out into the world, schools will be a place where you will see people gather in the morning. They talk, they share, and it's really important. And you can speak to this about schools. Really, they're a connection point for people. They're where people develop and relationships outside of the school. And we're talking about the whole community here, not just the children, the staff, the ancillary staff. We're talking about the parents, the parish, the wider community. There's a richness to the community spirit that exists over those different levels and how they interact through the school year. And it's to be aware of that. Again, you're not in an independent republic of your classroom. It's a centerpiece, and then you've got your school and you've got your wider community, and don't underestimate the role of the school in that wider community. Have anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think you've does that sound coming from my end or your end? But that's no, Miriam, I think you're right there. Like, and again, it's important to look up the school, understand the particular emphasis might have, the area, the nature of the area it serves, so that you can speak into that in the interview. So let's say the parish I'm living in here, Corrafin, a huge GA parish, right? It's pointless going for an interview in one of the schools here and not understanding that you want to teach in a school that is part of a parish that has a massive GAA heritage, right? 3 times.
Or the really possible.
Right, so you've got to be able to, there's once a year, there's a Raftery Cup play between the schools and the parish, and it's vigorously competed for. So, like, and again, down in Limerick, where my office is, there's schools that are serving very deprived areas. So strong sense of social justice, commitment to that. Like that's going to be very important. The schools, traveller community, they will be serving that as well. So you need to be aware of that and be able to speak to that. The more evidence you can give that you have looked up and understand the school you're hoping to be, you're hoping to join as a member of staff. All of that is signaling to the principal. This is somebody who is going to be an addition to the team, who will come in and enhance and work with us to improve what we're doing and to flourish, bring further flourishing to the school is operating.
So I suppose, you know, the religious education program in a Catholic school, it was a live O when I started out. It's now the Grow and Love. It's to understand that, it's to know, you know, it's written in line with Catholic preschool and primary school religious education, the curriculum, the actual religious education curriculum. You know, it's to have an understanding about what it aims to do. It's a great book. It's a great program, I have to say, having used it, because it's very user friendly. The feedback from my staff and from teachers in general has that they find it very easy to use. It's very good. And, you know, if you're going for second class, for example, or third class, go research the program for that class level before your interview. Know, if you do know what class you're going for, do know which you know, research the Grow and Love piece for that. And then of course we have Catholic Schools Week resources. They're available on the CSP website. They're there for the last number of years, as well as the current piece, and they're a huge resource for your classroom. And you know, and they have links to environmental work and the community and your place in the community, so they're worth a look as well. So I think we just then, I suppose the whole purpose here, if you like, or the underlying theme of what we've been talking about is your interview preparation. It's about being prepared. It's about that attention to detail. It's about understanding what it is you're trying to achieve here. You know, it's about, you know, knowing where you're applying to, knowing, is it a fit? Is it going to be a fit? And it's about, you know, ultimately it's about you being happy with that fit, as well as the school being happy with you fitting in. And I would just like to finish by wishing you the very, very best of luck in your endeavors, and, you know, going out there at this, you know, it's an exciting time when you start going out into classes where you're in control, rather than on teaching practice where somebody else is kind of steering the ship. You're then in charge, and it is exciting, and it is learning, and it is that first step in that development of yourself and in that learning. And I wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, just to join with that, wish you every luck in the coming years and for the rest of your career, and hope the next 2 years are particularly interesting. And I hope we've been of some help for you today. Just to thank David for the opportunity.
Thank you, David.
Something like this.
No problem at all. So we just like to imagine a clap in the room now. Was it for
Is anyone left?
No, I'm very sure there was a few awake on the back anyway. But it's really invaluable what you're after bringing for the students today. So thanks very much, Miriam and Alan. Yeah, it's really phenomenal. This is stuff is gold. This is the real nuts and bolts of starting off your career in education, and we just really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedules, particularly during these times. I can't imagine the stuff you're dealing with in terms of schooling and planning and everything that's happening and the queries you're getting. So thanks so much for taking the time out to speak to the students, and especially you, Miriam. I'm sure you would have liked to have been on campus, a Pat's graduate yourself. As it's
absolutely memory lane. If they let me back in.
Memory lane, yeah. So thanks very much for taking the time out, and I like the question you have posed here. So take some time now to consider how you would approach an interview question around ethos. And I think what might be a useful exercise for students now is that we're going to have our drop-in session on Friday at 2 p.m. For an hour. Now that's a session that you come to only if you have questions, or if you want to maybe unpack a couple of things more there. John, I understand it's submission time now around assignments. So Friday, I'm sure now you'll be under pressure. So come if you have something to ask. we'll stay around anyway for the hour. But if people start powdering off at about a half an hour in, that there's nobody kind of jumping in on the thing, I think it's only fair, because Miriam and Alan are very busy, that we call it a day at that stage. But you can send any emails or queries in advance if you like to me. But I think you should take that statement posed there by Miriam and Alan to take some time to consider the question, have a go at maybe articulating the question and answer a response yourself, and see what challenges or things that you might want to clarify. And Miriam and Alan will be more than happy to help. And take this opportunity. You're actually getting the chance to be that fly on the wall. And not only, but you're going to be a fly on the wall who can talk. So you can actually talk and get advice from the people who are doing this day in, day out, so that your chances will be improved and enhanced in light of taking the specialism in Catholic education, by making yourself a more desirable candidate for a Catholic school, but also in a more pragmatic way for the wider educational experience when you go out there, to be at an Educate Together school or any other school type. That you'll have the nuts and bolts and the basic structures in terms of actually going for interview to be a teacher in a school. But of course, the key kernel, that's the cherry on top here, is that we're speaking directly to the 90% schoolage type in the country, which is a Catholic school. So this is very much down that avenue. So thanks very much, Alan and Miriam.